My name is Joe, it's J-O-E, Crankshaw, C-R-A-N-K-S-H-A-W.
You want to go ahead and say your title with the Stuart News?
Okay, I'm a columnist and senior writer for the Stuart News in Stuart, Florida.
Joe, when we met the first time in your office, you told a great story about how people dealt with the mosquitoes in the very early days, how like there was a cape or a shadow following, and then the switches and dusting people off before they came in. You want to go ahead and tell that story?
Well, mosquitoes were one of the major problems of life in early Martin County. They were very bad. Cattlemen told stories of herds of mosquitoes or flocks of mosquitoes driving herds of cattle mad. They said that when they camped out on the trail at night and they heated up their coffee, you know, mosquitoes are attracted to heat, that they would have to brush a layer or two of them off of their coffee before they could drink it. And that there have been occasions when a horse was drained of its blood during the night. Now, whether those are just tall cattlemen's tales, I don't know, but they were very bad. If you lived here in the early 1800s and even up into around 1920, 24, 25, how you would get dressed in the morning would be that you would get up, and before you put on your shirt, you would wrap newsprint or some type of heavy gauze around your arms and around your legs. Then you would put on your regular clothes. If you're going outside, then you would put on a big hat with a net that hung down here. You would have gloves on, and you would carry a mosquito switch, which was made out of palmettos, shredded and woven to make a handle, and the way you did, you walked along swishing back and forth like this so that the mosquitoes didn't get too heavy on the front of your net. Now, when you went next door to visit your friends, having walked probably in those days several hundred yards, when you got to the door, they just didn't open the door and let you in. First, they had a big mosquito switch on theirs, which was bigger than the one you carried, and you would brush all the mosquitoes off, and then you would turn around and they would reach out the door and brush the mosquitoes off your back, and then they would let you in and kill whatever few mosquitoes came in with you, because they were a terrible problem, and everyone thought they were going to have to live with them forever. But mosquito control came in, and we have what we have today, which is, you've got to admit, a lot better situation.
You shared with us how when people would be walking, you'd see somebody walking in the distance, it looked like they had a...
Oh yeah, Ernie Lyons, who was an early resident here as a boy, said that on some occasions you could see people walking along the road, and it would look as if they had a cape or a veil blowing in the wind, and it's the mosquitoes behind them trying to find a way through all the mosquito netting and protection. Mosquitoes were a major problem here. They were one of the things that led to the creation of Martin County. The people in Indian River County, what is now Indian River County, thought they had devised a surefire way of getting rid of the mosquitoes through a system of ditches and dikes in the what we now call the impoundment areas, those low-lying marshes and things on the barrier island and inland, and they were going to dig ditches and they were going to let water in so that fish could get in and eat the mosquito larvae and get rid of them by that way. But they were part of St. Lucie County, and the people of St. Lucie County didn't want anything to do with it. And in Martin County, they were concerned about not getting enough road and school money from Palm Beach County, which we were then a part of. There were other issues like there were blue laws in effect, and you couldn't go to the movies and play baseball on Sundays, and the people in Vero Beach had a very good baseball team and they wanted to play on Sunday. So they started their move to form a county, and Martin County people started their move to form a county. And it was eventually successful. But the main reason that it got started was because the people in Vero Beach wanted mosquito control, and the people in St. Lucie County didn't think it would work. It's interesting to note that the second mosquito control system developed in the state of Florida after the one in what's now Indian River County was in St. Lucie County.
Why don't we go ahead and talk about the history of the counties? And as you know, we've got this long history all the way back, I guess, to Mosquito County or whatever. Why don't you go ahead and share, your recollection of how this area transitioned from county to county? You touched on it somewhat, but go ahead and.
Well, the counties had a lot of different names without ever moving. Originally, they were Mosquito County, and that it got its name because of the mosquitoes. They were very bad, and as I said, and so they called it Mosquito County. Then they broke it down and they created Santa Lucia County. And that was the county that extended from up in Brevard County down almost to Jupiter Inlet. And that was a county during the Armed Occupation Act period of the 1840s. And it had a county seat at Susanna, which is a town that's no longer on the maps, but it was someplace north of Ancona, I believe. I've never been able to be exactly sure where it is. And the people in that county were spread out over a long ways. When a group of renegade Indians killed Major Barker, who was a trader up north of Fort Pierce, the people thought that the Indians were on the warpath, and instead of defending their homesteads as they were supposed to do under the law, they abandoned Santa Lucia County and fled up to St. Augustine and to Melbourne, where they felt they would be safer because there were organized police forces and there were actually some soldiers. And so Santa Lucia County disappeared, and it had some very important people in it. One of its state representatives was Osian Hart. Osian Hart later on became governor of the state of Florida, and they were the people who dug the first St. Lucie Inlet. They wanted to let salt water into what was then a freshwater lagoon to kill off the freshwater grasses and attract the saltwater fish that are here. I think that's kind of interesting because we're all talking about preserving the ecology of the lagoon, when actually we changed the ecology of the lagoon back in the 1840s by digging the entranceway through for the St. Lucie Canal, and that let a huge amount of ocean water in, brought in ocean fish, and let them catch the more profitable ocean fish without having to go so far out to sea. So that was Santa Lucia County. Then we were part of Dade and Brevard County. They named Dade County for Major Francis Dade, who was killed in an ambush at the opening of the Second Seminole War. And they didn't know where Dade County was. They thought it was someplace near where the ambush had taken place, but as we all know, it was over here on the East Coast. But at any rate, it became Dade County, and also Brevard County. In fact, I think you've interviewed somebody named Sandy. You've interviewed Sandy Thurlow, and Sandy's house sits on what was the Dade-Brevard County line. She has a tree in her backyard, and a sign points to Dade and a sign points to Brevard, and that was where the county line went across Sewell's Point and Hutchinson Island out to the ocean. Then they created St. Lucie County, and because there was originally a Santa Lucia County, which is St. Lucie in Spanish, they say that St. Lucie County is the only Florida county that was ever created twice, and that included that portion of Martin County, which is Sewell's Point and Hutchinson Island and the Jensen Beach Rio area. That was all part of Santa Lucia County, or St. Lucie County, and we were part of Palm Beach County. In 1921, the people of this area of what is now Martin County decided that they wanted their own county. And they wanted it because they wanted more, the same things they wanted in 1925. They wanted more school money, they wanted more road tax money, they wanted a closer attention from the sheriff's office than they felt they were getting because we were the underpopulated portion of Palm Beach County. And they got a measure introduced into the legislature by a legislator from Osceola County to create a county which would be known as Everglades County. Everglades County would have extended from the St. Lucie River south to the Jupiter Inlet and the Loxahatchee River, and it would have gone west a little bit past what is now State Road 17, Warfield, 710 rather, Warfield Boulevard. It would not have gone out to the lake, but it would have been a big chunk of property taken away from Palm Beach County, and it would cause them to lose a considerable amount of property taxes. And they opposed the measure in the legislature and defeated it. So the first attempt to form this county failed. Then, as I explained to you earlier, when St. Lucie County wanted to get rid of the mosquitoes and have Sunday baseball and movies, they started creating their county. And so our people knew that we needed a county, so they sort of joined forces to lobby the legislature to get the two counties to be created. The people in Indian River County were more market-wise than some of our people were, and they immediately said that they wanted to call their county Indian River because it lay on the Indian River. And of course, it's become known for Indian River citrus, and so Indian River County gets a big boost every time anybody talks about oranges or citrus and everything. Our people didn't have a name for the county, but they were pushing it through at any rate, and having a little opposition, well, more than a little opposition from the Palm Beach County people. And the opposition continued until Governor John Martin was riding on a train from Miami to Jacksonville. I don't know what he was doing, but he was passing through here. And the leaders of our town, Walter and Stanley Kitchie and Kruger and a bunch of others, got on the train in West Palm Beach to lobby the governor for the creation of a county. And they told him about why they needed a county and how it would benefit Florida and why it would be much better and everything like that. And the legend is that he finally said to him, well, what will you call this county? And Stanley Kitching said, why, Martin County. And it sailed through right along with Indian River County without a hitch. And that's how we got to where we are now.
Great. Great story. How about the early political days? We've now got a county called Martin. How about, what was like our first county commission like? What were the things that they were challenged with?
I'm really not able to tell you anything a great deal. They had many challenges. The first Martin County,
could you say, yeah?
Yeah, the first Martin County Commission had a great many challenges, of course. The first one of which was, where was the county seat to be located? We all say it's in Stewart now, but that in those days, Jensen Beach was the largest community in the county, or almost the largest community. Indiantown was way out west, but they considered themselves a future metropolis. And the people in Port Salerno thought that they were going to be the major port city. And the people of Stewart had gotten Stewart designated as the interim county seat. Well, the words interim were a bugle call to say, okay, this is not the permanent county seat, and everybody should have a crack at getting the county seat. So Indiantown began heavy campaigning, and so did Jensen, and to some extent so did Port Salerno, although it was called Salerno in those days. the fighting went on, and it got so bad that Dad Wall, who was one of the first county commissioners, said that we ought to put the county courthouse on a barge and haul the damn thing back and forth along the canal, so we can have it in Indiantown one time and in Stewart another. And Indiantown actually, the people in Indiantown actually sued to try to get the county seat moved to Indiantown. It didn't go anywhere, and eventually in about 1930 there was a referendum held, and they decided that Stewart would be the permanent county seat. The other problems they had mosquito problems. They had to set up a mosquito control district because Indian River County was setting one up and telling everybody what a great job they were doing. They even convinced those stick-in-the-muds in St. Lucie County, who wouldn't let them have a district, that they should have one. And so ours was like not the third, but the fourth or fifth mosquito control project in the state, because the idea of ditching and diking and creating impoundment areas and letting little fish breed it and everything, that was all very new and upscale, and nobody knew if it would really work or not. So, and roads were another problem. They didn't have paved roads. They would cut a road through with a drag line or sometimes an oxen would pull along plows, and they would plow up the road, and then they would smooth it over, and then they would cover it with shell. Unfortunately, they took the shell from a lot of Indian middens and things like that, and a great deal of archaeological treasure went down the tubes in order to have a solid road base for what few automobiles and what wagons there were. So those were some of the early problems that they had.
Flagler and the railroad.
In the late 1880s, Henry Flagler was moving his railroad lines south. He was going to establish a new Riviera for the United States. He had thought that he had found it in St. Augustine, but then he had a bad freeze and he realized that that wasn't it, and he moved down to Ormond Beach and he discovered that wasn't it. And finally, after a big freeze, I think it was 1885, Julia Tuttle sent him her famous branch of orange blossoms and said, "Didn't freeze here." So he was going to go south to Miami eventually, and he had his sights set on building a big hotel complex in this area. And the original plan was for him to drive his railroad straight south down the center of Sewell's Point, jump over Hell's Gate, go down through Rocky Point and on down to West Palm Beach. But this was pineapple growing country in those days, and the people had productive pineapple fields that were making them a lot of money, and Flagler wanted free right-of-way. He thought that he should get free right-of-way because his railroad would then haul their pineapples, which would make it easier for them to get to market, and they would bring in new settlers and supplies and things like that. And he thought they were getting the better of the deal, but they said no. And the people on Sewell's Point were especially vehement in their opposition, and they flat refused to deal with him at all. They didn't want a railroad running down the middle of Sewell's Point. And he was kind of bumfuzzled, I guess is the word, what to do. And it didn't look like there was a solution to the problem until Walter Kitching sent him a letter that said, "I'll give you the right-of-way for your railroad and $400 if you'll bring your railroad to Stewart." Well, Flagler said that was acceptable, but he wouldn't take his money, but he would bring his railroad because he could get the right-of-way. So the railroad makes that big curve from Jensen down through Rio and around through North Stewart and jumps the river there at the narrow point. It came into Stewart. But Kitching had failed to tell him that he only owned land for about 300 yards back from the river. And the land past that point was owned by Otto Stipman and his brother. And they had put in their pineapple fields with an eye toward the future. You know how we often say that developers are planning their last crop to be a condo? Well, the Stipmans had their last crop was going to be a city. And so they laid out their fields in a grid system running north and south and east and west. And eventually when the town grew up, they would convert their field paths into roads, and they would sell off city lots from their pineapple fields. And Flagler's Railroad would cut diagonally across their grid system and mess it up, something awful. And they didn't want that to happen. So they had a fence on their property line, and they put Kurt Schroeder, who was their nephew, sitting up on the fence with a large shotgun, and told him to keep Flagler's crews from coming onto the property. You need to know that later on Kurt Schroeder was a mayor and a commissioner, and finally a much beloved city commissioner of the city of Stuart. He sat there with a shotgun and wouldn't let the railroad crews on. And he sent a message back to Flagler, and it supposedly said, "It's a damn Dutchman here with a shotgun, and he will shoot if we come on his property." So Flagler told him to go around to the other side of the Stipman property, shoot an azimuth back to where the rail ended on the north side, and start a rail moving south toward what would become Palm Beach, and he would handle the situation. Well, he found an attorney in St. Augustine who was Dutch, and more importantly, who could hold his liquor. And he sent him south to negotiate with the Stipmans with $400 to pay for the right-of-way and a 2-gallon jug of corn whiskey. Well, the Stipmans knew they couldn't negotiate with an attorney from St. Augustine without their own, so they got Thomas de Steuben, who's known as Judge de Steuben of Jensen Beach, who was a fairly well-known attorney in this area, to come down and negotiate with them. And so the attorney from St. Augustine came down, and he was, like them, a Dutchman. I really think they were all Germans, but in those days everybody called everybody Dutchman. I don't know why, but that seems to be the case. At any rate, the attorney suggested that before they got started, since things were sort of dry, maybe they ought to pass around the jug to just wet your whistle, as it was, and get things started. So they would negotiate, and then he would pass the jug, and I don't know whether he drank or not, but at the end of the day, the jug was empty. He had the right-of-way and $200. And the railroad could now cut on a diagonal across the Stipman's property. Well, the impact of that is seen today in Confusion Corner, because the road cut across at an angle there, and it cut through what we now call Colorado Avenue and East and West Ocean Boulevard. And when they put in the railroad station, they ran Flagler Boulevard down on the north side. And when Old Dixie finally came across the St. Lucie River, it went down on the south side and collided with Colorado Avenue and went south, and it became a very confusing place and a trademark for the city of Stuart. So when you see that place, lay a 2-gallon jug of corn whiskey.
You told a very personal story when we were with you about getting up at 4 a.m. with Ernie taking you out.
When I came to Stuart, Ernie Lyons was the editor of the paper. Ernie Lyons, probably the finest outdoor writer in the state of Florida, before or since. The man had a great love for the community. He was the leader of the first real environmental movements in this county. He opposed the channelization of the Kissimmee River, and after that project began, one morning he told me to get up about 4 o'clock and meet him, and so we got up and we went out to the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. Now, Ernie had little rowboats stowed all over the county so he could go out and just go fishing. And we got in this rowboat, but he didn't have any fishing gear. And I didn't know what he was doing, but I'd learned that with Ernie, you just went along and you didn't pester him with too many questions. We rowed up the river. Actually, he had a little small trolling motor, so we didn't really row, but we just motored up the St. Lucie River. We got up about opposite where Club Med is now. Wasn't there then, of course, but Ernie threw a big cinder block with a rope around it into the water, and we were anchored. And so I'm sitting there in the boat waiting to see what was going to happen. He said, just wait. Well, it was black. I don't know if you've ever been out in a place where there are no electric lights or anything. Well, in those days, there were no electric lights anywhere nearby. Stewart was a very dull glow down to the south. Fort Pierce wasn't even breaking the horizon. It was dark. The river was black, and the land was blacker, and the sky was black, and you couldn't see anything. The sun started to come up, and when it did, things kind of turned gray. The river became a kind of a slate gray, and the shores were gray, and the sky was gray and everything. And I said, what are we doing, Ernie? He said, wait. And then the sun came up, and it hit the river, and it silvered it a little bit. And then it came up higher, and it really turned it bright blue, and the sky turned blue, and the ground came up green with the bushes and everything. And the river exploded. Just turned into whipped cream. Marlin chasing tarpon. And big marlin. Not when they hit the water, sound like a cannon shot. Kabam! Spray flying everywhere. Tarpon, 25-pound tarpon, or snook rather, jumping to get away from the tarpon. I said marlin, but I meant tarpon.
You want to go ahead and back up? And
Yeah.
Just
when the
where can we come back in?
And it's just after the sun came up.
Yeah, just after the sun came up, the river turned blue, the countryside came up green, the sky got blue, and the river exploded, just turned into whipped cream and geysers of water. And it was tarpon coming out of the water chasing snook. I mean, big tarpon. When they hit the water, it's like a cannon shot. Bam! Spray flying everywhere. And 25-pound snook trying to get away from these marlin whose mouths were big enough to swallow them all. And I'm sitting there like, holy smokes. And Ernie said, remember what you see. It'll never happen again. They're killing this river. And unfortunately, he was right.
Great story. Sandy shared with us a little bit about the beginnings of Fern Hill and some of that, but you've got a story about Squarehead?
Yeah, well, after they built Fern Hill Cemetery, and they built it because the Kitching said that you couldn't have a proper city unless you could be buried there. This was a very healthy area, and very few people died, and the cemetery was there for about 2 years before anybody died. And finally, a commercial fisherman who got drunk on a Saturday night fell off that little fish house down at the end of the point there where the Roosevelt Bridge is, and he drowned. And everybody started making plans because they knew that the body would come back up in 2 or 3 days, and then they were going to have a funeral. But then they realized there were no roads leading to Fern Hill at that time, and that the way you got there was to go down and come up the creek. So finally, when this fisherman, whose name they didn't know, they just knew him as Squarehead, when his body came up, they had a coffin made and they lined it with white damask, and they put black crepe around this longboat, and they put palmetto fronds up on it, and turned it into a real funeral beer, I guess you'd say. And they rode it in a procession of boats up to the cemetery, and then they realized that they didn't have any place to offload it. There was no dock or anything, so they had to wrestle the casket up the hill and finally get it into the ground. And they got it into the ground, and they used an Episcopal prayer book to bury him, but that's when they realized that they only knew his name was Squarehead, and they buried him. Well, supposedly, since you can't find Squarehead on the cemetery files anymore, supposedly his family came and identified him and took him away. But in all my research that I've done, I've not found what his name was or when they got him. But they were very happy then because they did have somebody buried in their cemetery.
That pretty much brings us to a close of the things that we wanted to cover. However, this video celebrates the 75th anniversary of the county, the formation of the county, the history of the time. Is there anything that you want to share or something that you think is important for us to include?
No, those are interesting stories. The history of the county is so varied and so fascinating. We've had almost anything that you can think of has happened here in this county. For example, back in the 20s when they were using Filipinos to harvest the sugar out in the glades or to work the vegetable farms as well, a Filipino and a white woman fell in love. And they applied for a marriage permit in Palm Beach County, and they wouldn't issue it to them. So they came here to Martin County, and they were issued a license by the county clerk, J.R. Pomeroy, and not only that, he married them. He was using his notary public powers, and he married them. Well, this caused a huge uproar. The people in Palm Beach County were holding torchlight parades through the area of Belgrade and Moorhaven, well, not Moorhaven, but Belgrade and Clewiston, and they were making it very tough on the migrant workers that were there and everything, and they were looking for this couple who were now hidden out in Indiantown. And the Ku Klux Klan got into the thing, and they burned a couple of crosses, and they threw some dynamite around and everything. So we've had our share of race riots. The people of this county defended that couple and helped them get on their way out of the country. They went back to the Philippines. But we've had that side, and we've also had the side when a yard worker was hurt on Jupiter Island. He was working for Mr. Barstow. I don't know if Aunt V told you this story or not, but they had been having difficulties getting a hospital for this community, and they brought him up to the St. Lucie Sanitarium, which was over on Hospital Pond there off of Palm Beach Road, and took care of him. But then they determined that he was so badly hurt that he needed to go to a major hospital, and the nearest one was in West Palm Beach, and it took them 8 hours to get an ambulance from West Palm Beach to here so that he could go back to a hospital. And so the Barstow and the Reed family on Jupiter Island decided that that was an intolerable situation for any group of human beings to live on. And so they donated the land where we have Martin Memorial Medical Center North now, so that a hospital could be created and formed. And they created a trust to help get the thing started. And so we've had everything in this county. We have very generous people, Mrs. Vaughn Monroe, Francis Langford. It's a tremendous number of people who very caring and concerned about this county, and it makes it a county different from any other county in the state of Florida as far as I'm concerned. We have a great many natural attractions, but the best thing that we have in this county is its people.